me my microphone is on. Is that on? Not yet. While my voice is appearing, I'll say something about this speaker thing. I think my kids would just be rolling about laughing now at that sort of sense that, and I know, I'm sure David's would as well, it's just great from our point of view to be able to share with you and to be part of this conference, so thank you very much. I nearly didn't make it. We've been in Australia for 3 months, and Margaret and I had a little bit of a holiday, and we ended up in Darwin. Lovely place to have holiday, beautiful weather. Except I also ended up in the emergency department at Darwin Royal Hospital. That is an experience. If you want to know more about it, I'll tell you about it. But anyway, I had to have some surgery in Sydney as a result, and had to miss the conference in Perth in the end, but it's great to be here. So thank you for the welcome. And thank you, Sam, for your words of encouragement. Because I think the position that you are in school leaders, as school leaders, is so important in so many young people's lives. And it's a privilege for me to be able to share some thinking with you about that. Okay, so the theme of my talk, wise as serpent, gentle as dove, or as innocent as doves, I won't actually mention that now till the end. And you'll see where it fits in once I get there. So if you're wondering where the doves and the serpents are on the way through, they're coming. Which one do I press? Oh, there we go. Right. Okay, we're there. Let me tell you a story. In 1993, I was in Moscow on October the 4th, and I was actually about to fly out home to the UK, and there was this notice in the hotel lobby which said, "Dear guests, due to the demonstration at the White House, the shuttle bus will only call at the in-tourist stop." Oh, that's all right, often happens, I thought. What I didn't know was what was happening, and Margaret did. She was watching it on the telly. And this was what was happening. I'm getting stuck. Am I pressing the right one, Eric?
There's only one.
Yeah, I know, that's right. That's what I'm looking at. Well, we may get to the point where I have to stand Eric there and he presses it. Anyway, this was what was happening. Now, I don't know how many of you have memories of this, but this was when Boris Yeltsin had Parliament in rebellion against him, and he sent the tanks in, and they were shelling the White House across the river, and I was sitting in my hotel not realising what was going on, and Margaret was watching this at home on the telly. So it was quite an experience for me and for her, but that wasn't the reason silly me. Oh, there we go, right. You have to press it about 3 times. The experience was actually why I was there, because I was there with an organisation that had been commissioned by the recently formed Moscow Russian Federation of Education to design a moral education curriculum for Russian schools. This was post the collapse of Soviet Empire, so it was a completely new start for the Russian Federation. And the group that I was working with had come in from America and had been invited to input into this situation. And they all came from Christian schools across America, so Arizona, Texas, and various other places. And what they did was to bring with them a Bible curriculum. And it was the curriculum that they taught in their schools. And the theory was that once you know your Bible, you will become a moral person. Oops. having sympathies with Leighton here now. So the question is, what does a post-Soviet moral education look like? Now, unfortunately, this whole thing fell apart, and there became a debate about whose fault was it that it had fallen apart. Some of my Christian friends from America said that it was because they were unequally yoked. In other words, I'm another clicker. They said it was because the Russians weren't ready for the curriculum that they needed. The Russians said it was because the whole thing was not relevant to them, and the idea that atheist teachers who had taught in a Soviet framework could be required to pray before each lesson as part of their preparation for a moral education curriculum actually wasn't quite the right approach. So it raised a huge issue for me about context. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at context. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to introduce you to Ethan, it's not working.
The big green button?
It's the green button, yeah, I've got the green button, yeah. I'll go back to the other one. There we go, right. Yeah, I might end up doing this thing where I'm going to say, next slide. We'll see how we get on. Anyway, I want to introduce you to somebody who's had a profound influence on my thinking about how we lead as Christian educators in the current context. This is a man called Bishop Leslie Newbigin. Now, some of you may have heard of him. And Newbigin was a missionary bishop in the Church of South India, sent out from Birmingham in the UK, and he spent his career there working amongst the Indian people and bringing the gospel through the church there. And he developed an understanding of what it was to be a Christian in the wider world. And he developed the notion that we as Christians in the world are seeking to create a missionary encounter with the culture where we are working. So missionary encounter was a key idea. And to me, that's one of the key things that Christian schools are doing, creating missionary encounter for the young people that they are working with, that we are working with. And one of the things that he was really clear about was the notion that the gospel is public truth. It's not just there for us Christians, it's there for the whole world. And the third thing he talked about, and which is a fundamental of any training for mission work, was he introduced the notion of contextualization. Now that's a key word, I think, for us as Christian educators, contextualization. So, what do we mean by that? Right. This is a quotation from a theologian called Richard Borkham, who is a very well-known biblical scholar. And what he's telling us in this quotation is that as Christian leaders, we have two responsibilities in terms of interpreting the mission of the gospel to the culture which we're working in our schools. And those two responsibilities are, first, that we have to be able to interpret Scripture. That's a fairly obvious one. I think we all said that. But the second thing he said is that we need to be able to interpret the contemporary world that we're working in. And it's the bringing together of those two in an effective ministry that actually lies at the heart of an effective missionary encounter. That's what didn't happen in Moscow. There was a context which was a deeply atheistic state emerging, looking for a moral education program. and a group of Christians who brought with them a product that worked really well in the Christian schools of Arizona and Texas, and thought therefore it would work in the Russian context. So understanding our context is an incredibly important responsibility. And to me, one of the great things about leadership in Christian schools is getting that right, getting that contextual understanding and the way in which the gospel relates to it. So that's going to be the theme of my presentation this morning. So let's just look a little bit at the context in which our students are operating or are inhabiting. And actually, it's the context which our schools as well are set within communities. What's going on in this world that we inhabit? Well, there's a fair amount of analysis of what is happening in the current context. I've picked out a few things which I am going to suggest are really relevant to our thinking about leadership in Christian schools. So, one of the things that a lot of people are beginning to wake up to is that we increasingly in the West are living in what we might call a post-Christendom society. So we're living in a society which once looked to the Christian faith as the sort of framework for its thinking. So that's going now, and if you look at the surveys that are coming out in a lot of Western societies, what you'll find is increasing numbers of people saying that they are of no faith, no religion, to the questions that get asked in national surveys. In the UK, that's the majority now, it's well over 50%. If you look at young people in the sort of 16 to 25 age group, it's getting up to near 75%. It's not true of Africa, but it is true of the context in which we're operating. So that sort of assumption, which is the world that many of us grew up in, that actually Christianity is the sort of normative thing in the air, is on the way out for our students. We're also living in a world where aggressive secularism is increasingly influential. In Sydney, at the beginning of our visit here, I was sharing a conference stage with a guy called Steve McAlpine, who some of you I'm sure have heard of. And he's now talking about the fact that we Christians are often seen as the bad guys in public debate. We're the racists, we're the homophobes, we're the misogynists, we're the people who want to go around and impose our position on everybody else. We're the bad guys. So there's a challenge, isn't there? How do you prepare young people to be the bad guys in the modern world? How do you prepare them for that? We live in a world where there's a tendency to reductionism. Now, I will pick that up in more detail, particularly in relation to what we're doing in the curriculum. But what I mean by that is that what's really important is the sort of the measurable, the scientific. And other forms of thinking are less important. The supernatural is reduced to the material. A lot of emphasis on well-being, great, but well-being is getting reduced to all sorts of things to do with the physical and the emotional, but not the spiritual. Amongst Christian young people, some of the research is suggesting that the sort of Christianity which they're adopting is very influenced by the spirit of our age. There's a guy called Christian Smith who's done a big survey of American youth Christianity, and he, I think perhaps over unfairly, but he sort of defines it as moral therapeutic deism. And what he means by that is that there's a tendency for young people to settle down to the idea that as long as they're reasonably nice to people, they're moral, they'll be fine. That the role of their Christian faith is to give them that therapy they need to make them feel better, and that God is sort of out there, but he's not he's not involved in their daily life. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but certainly the sort of Christian faith that many young people experience may not be what Newbigin would have called the gospel. Maybe different from that. And Graham Stanton, who's at Ridley College in Melbourne, has done quite a lot of research on teenage Christianity, and he describes it as expressive individualism. In other words, the cult of the individual has really infected a lot of young people, think it's all about them and how they express themselves and their place in the world, and that sense of being part of a community serving God is sort of getting lost. And then the final thing is that the world that young people are going into is one where the power of what people call cultural liturgies is incredibly strong. Now, what we mean by cultural liturgies is forms of practice that shape one's thinking and being. And there are a whole load about that. And these create desires in people. So one cultural liturgy, for example, which is really strong in the Western world, is the notion that the future is about a career in which you prosper financially and you gain status. That's a very strong cultural liturgy. And what they experience is that messaging through their lives. The notion of a vocation in which you are serving God and the world around you is not part of that agenda. So there's a huge sort of pressure which is often in the background, which is influencing young people. Now, tomorrow, John Collier will be talking about some of the impacts that that's having on graduates from Christian schools. So I just put some up here to give you a sort of little taster. And it's really important to realise this, that we are actually facing a situation where, in many cases, we're not fully impacting young people with the ability, we're not offering them the ability to live well in this world that they're moving into. So I have a question for you. How do we respond as Christian educators to this world? Do we respond by just keeping them in the world of the church? Or do we respond by helping them to live well in this new world? How does that affect the way in which we run our schools? This is a picture of Nottingham city centre in the UK, where I used to live. This is a picture of a man who has faithfully preached the gospel. I don't know his name, but I've seen him on many occasions. And he faithfully proclaims in the market square, week by week, as people walk past him. And one of the dangers, I think, in Christian education is that we become like this. We become the people who our children walk past, when actually there's a world out there in which we should be equipping them to live. So that's the theme of what I'm going to pursue with you today. And I'm going to deal with two challenges. There are many more than the two I'm going to pick on, but I'm going to pick on two challenges that I think that we as Christian educators, Christian leaders in schools, are having to respond to, which are in the big world. And they're impacting education massively. And they will impact your schools because your schools have government funding. And government is becoming increasingly interested in these two areas of thought and work. So what are they? What are the two challenges? Challenge one is, how are we to be Christian in a post-Christendom world? What does that mean? How do we do that? Now, this is of interest to government, because government is really concerned about community cohesion. Government is really concerned about fracturing of communities and about the impact particularly of culture wars and the way in which that gets expressed often through religious debates and arguments. So community cohesion, living well with diversity, that's something that matters. And certainly in the UK, we have legislation which requires schools to respond in particular ways. And I know that you're facing these challenges. You know, equality, diversity and inclusion are big issues. This has got a related question. How do we educate children in Christian schools, young people in Christian schools, in a secular world? Now, what I mean by a secular world is a world where people are having to live together in the public square, work together, get on together, and be citizens. How can you be a citizen in a secular world? And certainly in Education Australia, the word secular is really important. It's one of the framing concepts for governments in thinking about education. Now this guy, some of you may know, does anybody recognise this guy? Guy called, yes? Yeah, John does, yeah. A guy called Brian Hill, who was Professor of Education at Murdoch University in Perth. He was the founding Dean of the Faculty of Education. Former Scripture Union Schools worker, fine Christian man, who wrote extensively about this, absolutely fundamentally shaped my thinking about it. And what I'm about to share with you is really shaped by some of the thinking that he did. But the question is, how do we prepare young people to live in this secular world where everybody's citizens, but people are very different from each other? And how's our school positioned in relation to this diversity? Now, in one sense, Sam was sort of beginning to take us into this in terms of, you know, we're learning more to cope with diversity within the church. And that's good and that's important. And a lot of churches struggle with that. We've got an even bigger task about how do we prepare young people to flourish in a world which is radically more divided than even the churches. How do we do it? Well, I'm going to paint you now a binary. Binaries are always wrong, always misleading, but are often helpful because they help clarify what our sort of, if you like, the choices are at the ends of spectrum. So I'm going to present you with a little bit of a binary. How do we respond in our thinking as Christians about working and being Christian in a world which is really diverse? And how do we position our schools? So I'm going to use two pictures, and one or two of you may have seen these already, so I apologise for that. So there's a picture. Now, just very quickly on your tables with the person next to you, I'm going to suggest you just work out, what's that picture? What area is it? What's happening? Just quickly, just talk to your neighbour for 30 seconds or so. Anybody got any idea? Not someone who's heard me talk about it before. Anybody know where that is? Yeah, okay. Yeah, Eric's got it, but he's seen it before. It's France, a beach in France, okay? What's going on? Anyone know? Okay, you've got 2 policemen or 3 policemen talking to a lady dressed in a bikini. She is being moved off the beach. Why is she being moved? Because she's offending the other people on the beach. Because what she's doing is, by her dress, she's passing judgment on those who are wearing bikinis. Because the French response to diversity is to say we all conform to a secular, by which they mean neutral, position. If you're French, you do not display your religious commitment in public, because we are a secular state. So if you're working in a French school as a Christian, there can be any sort of sense that your faith shows through in any of your clothing. So you can't wear a crucifix or a cross or anything like that. That's one approach to secularity. Now, we have an example of that in the UK. Some of you may have heard about the Michaela School. It's a school in London that was set up as what we call a free school. Free schools are ones that are funded by the government, but they are built on particular philosophies. The headmistress of this school describes herself as the strictest head teacher in the world, so if anybody else wants to claim that, you've got to get past this lady, Kathy. And she's got a reputation for running a school which is highly successful. It is the most improved school in the UK in terms of performance. So it's got a massive reputation. The discipline is very interesting. Children are not allowed to take their eyes off the teacher. So all the time their attention is to be focused on the teacher. There's a very strong view of what learning is in terms of pedagogy. And so it's a very interesting case study. She had a challenge recently because half of her school are Muslim. And some of the Muslim girls wanted to pray in the playground. Now, you'll probably all know that Islamic prayer is very, it's a practice that is very public, okay? She refused them permission to do it on the grounds that this was a secular school. That's her understanding of it. So it's a robust and peaceful secularism allied to those traditional values which all religions share. So they all sing the national anthem. Now, in the UK, that is almost unheard of. So twice a week they sing the national anthem instead of having religious prayers. Okay? But that's neutral, that's all shared. The parents took her, the Muslim girl's parents took her to the courts in the end, but the courts ruled, and they said that she has declared that this is a secular school. The parents all know that, so the children have to accept that. So that's one view of how you respond to secularism. It's the French view. It's the view that if you come here...
We were there and then others were there.
I do like that quote. It's not very
As a Christian character, maybe.
Get it, mate. How you doing? So, with the spot the second video that was on that flash drive, the cue for it was I could talk about early your day, but instead, why don't I show you and then I'll sort of set this up.
If we could just get our attention back to this. Thank you, Trevor, for a good session, and if this is only the first part, I very much look forward to the next part. But this is an opportunity for you to just indicate if you have a question or a comment at your table. We highly appreciate it. Also, a bit of feedback for Trevor. You'll just very much keep that up. Nothing. Michael Bray. From Toulon.
Thanks, Trevor. I'm absolutely 100% on board with everything you've said this morning. How do we navigate, I guess, a personal knowledge, and where does that tip over into inadvertently leaning towards moral relativism, perhaps, that concept of your truth and my truth, and the flavour of tolerance that seems to sit across everything we're doing at the moment as well?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I will be saying a bit more about that this afternoon. And just to flag it up, there's a sort of understanding of knowledge that I'm working through, which is based on what I call critical realism. I think the answer to the question is the recognition that truth is there. There is truth. We are human interpreters and experiencers of that truth, and that is always impacted by our own personal cultural circumstances and way of life and beliefs. Therefore, we tend to understand that truth in different ways, respond to it differently. And therefore, what's important is that children are taught to debate well. So it's about learning to listen, learning to debate well, learning to understand why you disagree with other people, but not giving up on the idea that we are all, as human beings, in a search for truth. Some education has certainly gone down the relativistic road. More of a threat nowadays in the Western world, I think, is coming from the idea that there's only one view of knowledge, and it's what the government tells you.
Thank you. Paul Thompson from Bundaberg.
I'm not quite sure how to word this question, so I apologise if I ramble a bit too much. In a world where our students live in, our children live in, what's good for you, hey, if you're cool with that, you do your thing and I'll do my thing. And yet, even within this room, there's hundreds of different worldviews, as you shared. Is there a point to try and actually define what this knowledge is when we as a school can try and do something, and yet at the end of the day, the students are just going to go, hey, if you're cool with that, no worries, that's you do you and I'm going to do me.
Yeah, that's the expressive individualism thing, which I mentioned, which is very influential amongst young people, where Graham Stanton's research is showing us. So I think we do have to bring back the public truth idea that Newbigin put there as being really important, the gospel as public truth. And so therefore, I think what's important is that we have got a clear view of our epistemological position as a school. Now, I don't know many schools that will go around, sit there in a sort of executive meeting and talk about their epistemological position. But what they're doing, what they're trying to do is to answer the question that you've just asked. How do we deal with the fact that our students may well be thinking, well, that's just what they're saying. How do we build into the curriculum that sense of accountability to truth? So that needs to happen in Christian studies, when they're reading the Bible. It needs to happen in science as well, so that what they realise is that people respond differently to science, but that doesn't change the fact that there's truth that you're accountable to. So, you know, if you take Francis Collins and Richard Dawkins, two geneticists, one an atheist, one a Christian, they can both agree on the science of genetics, but actually they fundamentally disagree on the importance of that in the world at large and how you build response to that. So the science curriculum needs to draw in that sort of debate to help children understand that what knowledge is something that we end up debating, but it doesn't mean that there isn't truth out there. And it's no good just saying, well, that's your truth. Or alternative facts. You know, these are my alternative facts, to quote the great Donald Trump. Always quoted.
We've got time for one last question. Yeah.
Hi Trevor, you mentioned making a positive contribution as a citizen of a diverse society. Can you give us some examples of what that positive contribution looks like that helps us to make more ground with our students?
Okay. I think anything where they are learning to engage seriously with, how can I put this, the other, people who are different from them. So it's very easy within a Christian context to nurture an attitude of there are those out there, they're out to get us, we're the victims. It's going on in the UK at the moment. In the Christian community in the UK, what I'm seeing is Christians being nurtured in the idea that this is a really difficult place to live. You know, that all these people out there are taking over our world. So you create this sense of threat, victimhood, very easy to do within Christian communities. So how do we nurture a more positive response? How do we nurture a response which says, it's a great world out there which we can be active in contributing to, like the early church was. I mean, the early church was a very beleaguered community in many senses. So that means the sort of attitudes that we're conveying through the way we do Christian worship, the assemblies, the way we talk to them in class, the sort of programs we encourage them to get involved in. Are all our programs always with Christians? Or do we seek to build, you know, partnership with other people from different viewpoints? My experience of it was working as the chair of the Religious Education Council in England and Wales, which has everybody in it, from an atheist to Zoroastrians and everything in between. And particularly, one of the things I've learned is building partnerships with hardline atheists is one of the things that we need to do as Christians. Because until we do that, they can have all their misconceptions about us reinforced. They only have to look at the newspapers. So it's about how we plan our culture and how we introduce our children to that sort of sense of excitement about the contribution that we as Christians can make to the wider world as we take that public truth into that wider world.
Well, let's just say thank you for your first session this morning.